Good afternoon. Thanks for joining us across the fence. I'm Keith Silva, in for Fran Stoddard. As the lyrics to that old song go, to every season, turn, turn, turn. For commercial vegetable growers, fall frost signals the end of the outdoor growing season. Winter is a busy time for many produce farmers as they sell stored crops, ramp up production indoors, and get ready for next year. To learn about Vermont's vegetable and berry industry, we're talking with someone whose impact on the commercial vegetable industry in the Northeast cannot be understated. For 3 decades, Vern Grubinger has been the name farmers, researchers, and policymakers turn to when it comes to education, support, and understanding the challenges facing vegetable and berry growers in Vermont and the Northeast. Thanks for talking with us today, Vern.
Good to be here.
Over the years working with growers, what are some of the most significant changes you've seen in Vermont's vegetable and berry industry?
Well, one of the things that's happened is there's been a great increase in the number of high tunnels, which is the indoor growing system of a non-permanent greenhouse. There are now thousands of these across the state. There's been a shift to more and more ecological and organic production, and there's been a boom in demand for local produce, not just through direct markets like farmers markets, CSA, and farm stands, but also direct to store. There's a lot of wholesale markets that are now focused on retail, which has, helped our growers make a living on the farm.
How many of those high tunnels do you think you saw at the beginning of your career?
I'd say there were probably a few dozen, maybe getting into the hundreds, and really now there's thousands of them. And this resulted from the work of Dr. Otho Wells at the University of New Hampshire. He really started figuring out a system that worked in the Northeast in the late 1980s, along with Ed Person, a grower who's since become a high tunnel manufacturer. It's interesting. Otho came from South Carolina, so he knew it was cold up here, and he was looking for ways for growers to extend their growing season.
Speaking of extending the growing season and all the things that come with it, help viewers understand some of the challenges that growers face nowadays.
Well, some of them are just like in the past. There's all kinds of insects, diseases, and weeds, although there are a lot of new ones. We're facing new insects that were not around when I started my career. Access to good farmland has gotten increasingly challenging as prices go up and more competition for the use of the land. And maintaining a reliable labor force is also something that's a big challenge for growers.
Always a big challenge. You lead UVM's vegetable and berry team. Talk about the programs that you focus on.
Well, of course, we cover all aspects of commercial production, but some of the areas that we focus on have to do with the staff we have. So Becky Madden's our nutrient management specialist, and that's really about making good use of fertilizers and soil amendments, both to enhance profitability and crop production, but to protect water quality. We focus on produce safety. Hans Estrin leads our small-scale produce safety accreditation program, which is really a one-of-a-kind thing in the Northeast. And we also recently started up a pollinator support program led by Laura Johnson, trying to find multiple uses for things like cover crops that not only improve the soil, but to better understand when they flower and support pollinators.
Well, all that team is sort of focused on, the distinction between now sort of almost 2 seasons, an indoor season and an outdoor, growing season, what we think of as the growing season. And you mentioned high tunnels earlier. Have they become as indispensable as tractors on vegetable farms, regardless of if you're doing, primarily markets for winter growing?
Well, maybe not quite as indispensable as tractors, but close.
Okay.
One thing besides just extending the season and getting a few more weeks of growth on either side is just the control of the environment. So keeping the rain and the wind off of crops really enhances the quality of what you produce, and just the ability to control all kinds of things like using beneficial insects and having them stay inside the tunnel. Whereas if you release them outdoors, they disappear from the fields pretty quickly. And it's not just the high tunnels and indoor growings that extended the season, but also a lot of the work of our UVM Extension agricultural engineering team has helped growers improve their storage facilities. So some crops you can grow in the winter, like the leafy greens and cold hardy crops, but there are a lot of crops that you grow in the regular season, but then can sell all winter long because they can be stored. Everything, potatoes, onions, cabbages, the list goes on and on. But having a good wash, pack, and storage situation is really important to be able to capture those markets.
That's a perfect segue because I was going to ask you about the engineering team. How important is it that you have, we're talking food safety standards here when we're talking about wash and pack and storage facilities. So how has engineering helped you, and are those challenges different than the challenges that you would face when you're just trying to grow crops and, as when you started your career?
Well, again, because the demand for local produce has increased, people want it, as much as possible year round, and these storage crops can last for quite a while. So the beauty of our program is it brings together produce safety. You want that water to be clean and the food contact surfaces to be clean, but also increasing the efficiency of how much time it takes to handle things and how well coordinated the flow of materials are is something that enhances farm profitability. So when these things come together, that's a beautiful thing.
We talked a little bit about some of the innovations, but some of the things that you're talking about, whether it's season extension or I've seen high tunnels on farms be used for, very specific crops. But what about just the garden variety tomato? Are those still things that still hold a lot of focus for growers and attention that you need to pay for them?
Well, sure, there's a lot of tomatoes in the garden, but when you get inside into high tunnels, different kinds of varieties are used. They're really the greenhouse types, and those can get much taller and continue to produce for many months and have disease resistance to some of the things that you find in that more humid environment in a tunnel. There's also a lot of grafting going on where the varieties are actually spliced onto a more hardy rootstock, something people are more familiar with apple trees, but it can be done with vegetables too. And once you've been growing in the same soil for a number of years, sometimes the root diseases build up, and so grafting becomes really important.
And we talked off air about heirloom tomatoes, that's another, specific kind of tomato that can be grown in these high tunnels and these areas that then can be washed, packed, and stored for, wintertime or, whenever they need to be used.
Yeah, so one thing that's great about our local growers is they adapt to the local market interests, and not everybody wants a commodity tomato from the supermarket. So people are growing heirlooms and cluster tomatoes and grape tomatoes, and there's all kinds of unusual things, both for their culinary attributes, taste, but also appearance. They come in all colors and sizes and shapes, so that keeps things interesting for people that like to eat tomatoes.
Vern, I don't want to age or date either of us, but I've known you for a little while, and I know, your primary job is the work that you do for Extension as the vegetable and berry specialist, but you've done a lot of work reaching out to non-farmers, educating people, helping folks understand, how important, farmers are to Vermont, vegetable farmers, the issues they face. Is this just part of the job, or have you tried to make an extra effort to get everybody else under the tent, so to speak?
I think it is part of the job. That production and consumption of produce is really just one way to look at this whole system. All of the other benefits we get of what the working landscape looks like, having regional food security, having trust in our food system. When you know the people that are growing it, there's a lot less to worry about. And I think some issues were revealed in the pandemic, just having a local supply chain when things can't be delivered across the country or across the hemisphere to the stores. It's a good thing to have people in your backyard that can produce food.
And making sure that those people producing food are held to the same standards of the big companies. Food safety is food safety, regardless of your size.
Yeah, and I think a lot of the small growers actually have a lot lower risk because they aren't aggregating product from multiple sources and sort of compounding the potential for something to go wrong.
Right. We've got a few minutes left here, Vern. In addition to your role leading UVM Extension's Veg and Berry team, you've also got a leadership stake in Northeast SARE. What is that, and what's its connection to UVM?
SARE stands for Sustainable Agriculture Research and Education. It's a program of the USDA, National Institute of Food and Agriculture, and it's a regional grant program. So the Northeast region is hosted by the University of Vermont, and we are funded to make 7 different kinds of grants. We make grants to farmers, to graduate students, to researchers, advocates, and there's professional development too, train the trainers for people like me, bringing Extension up to speed on sustainable ag issues. So we essentially put out calls for proposals, and people bring their best ideas to help generate new useful information, and teams of reviewers look at those proposals and decide what the best investment is. So we make a lot of grants every year, about 100 grants for a total of $7 million across 12 Northeast states. So a lot of great information gets generated, and you can see those projects. There's a searchable project database. If you just go to SARE.org, you will find it.
Excellent. Just a couple minutes left. What are some examples? Because what's interesting about those SARE grants is these are, I want to say citizen scientists, but these are farmers as scientists. They're doing research that is going to ultimately benefit their constituents and also universities, extensions all across the country.
There's a lot of different ways to do research, and that's why we have different kinds of grant programs, some suited for farmers, others for professional scientists and researchers, but all kinds of great inquiry gets done and things get discovered. We've had farmers figure out how to convert tractors to run on electric. There are researchers working on improved feed for dairy cows to, reduce greenhouse gas emissions. There's renewable energy. We fund projects on aquaculture, on urban agriculture, and even social issues where people are looking at better ways to connect to their communities and people that buy their food.
Just about a minute left, Vern. I know you've worked with farms and farmers of all sizes, but what interactions do you have with everyday gardeners and vegetable growers?
Well, I started as a county agent way back in the day, and some people here still have that perception. So I get little old ladies bringing me plants and leaving them on my desk, which is a fun way to provide service. And then there's, a whole other set of sort of communities of influence. So we have a whole New England-wide vegetable and berry team, and then there's nationally people working on things like soil health. So it's a wonderful thing to be embedded in all these different layers of people just trying to generate useful information to make agriculture more sustainable.
Well, Vern, thank you. To learn more about the projects of UVM Extension Vegetable and Berry Team, you can visit uvm.edu/horticulture. And if you are a farmer and you want to learn more about the Northeast SARE, visit www.northeastsare.org. I want to thank everyone here at WCX for making this program possible, and as always, thank you for stopping by Across the Fence.